For a conversation on how your data could save your life, please welcome Dr. Dara Richardson-Heron, Dr. Andrew Norden, Chief Medical Officer at COTA, and Kathy Giusti, founder of the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation and co-chair of Harvard's Kraft Precision Medicine Accelerator. Here to lead the conversation is The Atlantic's James Hamblin.
Thank you all so much for coming to talk with us today. We have three visionaries here who are going to completely change medicine, and there are some challenges and some obstacles, but before we discuss that, I want to hear exactly, in an ideal scenario, what is your vision for how you would use data to save my life? Or anyone else's life. and I'm whoever would like to kick it off.
I'm happy to go first. So I think the whole point of data is to have enough of it, and I mean high quality, standardized abundance of data to actually answer the questions that can help cure the patient's disease. And I think the vision of the future is to understand where data comes from. Academic centers have beautiful data with genomic, not always easy to share. Community centers have great clinical data, but maybe not genomic. So how do you start to bring the data together? I think we're finding, and I think you're hearing today, that sometimes going directly to the patient, the time may be right now for patients to start getting engaged in providing their own data and making sure they're part of the solution.
What are we searching for here? What's the goal? What is the outcome that is ideally
cures, an extension of life.
Okay. Exactly. But how does that change what it means to go to the doctor? You know, what does that look like at a practical level?
For us, my focus has been on the fact that doctors are spending inordinate amounts of time entering data into EHR systems, so much so that they hate it, and the patients who like to look their doctor in the eye and interact with them hate it. And yet, when we want to ask basic questions of the EHR systems, like about how even an individual provider organization cares for a particular type of patient, those questions are almost unanswerable today. So, you know, to me, there's an enormous focus that we need on making data in the EHR usable. That way we can learn from every patient in the course of routine care, rather than just the small fraction who happen to enroll in clinical trials or who participate in a particular program that's been made available to them. And so, you know, I think this is a way, if we can get there, this is a way that we can learn from every patient and incorporate all types of patients and their diseases in like a learning ecosystem.
And I think for our vantage point, we want to get to people before they are even patients. Our program wants to collect data and information that will help us hopefully identify diseases earlier, or when people are not even sick. And we really want to focus on prevention in addition to finding the right cures for the right person at the right time. So we're really excited about collecting information from people from all diverse walks of life, so that we'll have more information about what impacts us as individuals, our own impact, whether it's our lifestyle, our environment, and our biology. And that way scientists can develop more cures and treatments and preventive measures before we ever get to the point of being sick.
So I think you have to understand the difference, though, because this is a panel where we're explaining to you that we care deeply about getting the patients engaged in their healthcare. I tend to look at it from a fatal disease, multiple myeloma, which I have and run a foundation for multiple myeloma. And Dara is looking at it from healthy subjects who are not always so healthy, right? Mm-hmm. So the whole point of it is to come together, because the thing that we all share is that as patients, we don't always understand. We don't treat our healthcare like we do a regular consumer. If you are literally out there buying your goods and services in the retail sector or other things, that's not how we treat our healthcare. You heard it on a previous panel. We kind of talk to our doctors, we want them to like us, but we are paying the healthcare system to get really good care. I think now as we move forward, now is the time, and I think that's why this is an exciting time. I don't think any of us would have said to you 5 years ago, oh, put the patient at the center, they're ready for this. But what has changed is, in our surveys, 90% of patients will give their data to help with treatment options. 60% of patients are looking at their portal from their center, so they're getting used to looking at data. And now when you look at things like blood biopsies, you don't have to go to an academic center to get your biopsy done. We can actually go to your house with a phlebotomist, pull your blood sample, and get it sequenced. So these changes are making it this amazing time where we can pull the data directly from some of these research organizations, as can all of us do it, but we need partners like COTA to help us pull in that EHR and make sure the data goes to a very safe place.
And so this long-term vision, for how you're saving my life is that I might be able to go to my doctor and get a more specific treatment regimen, be diagnosed earlier. What is the ideal outcome of all this work?
I mean, I'm sure we both have different but complementary answers to that question. Today, if you're diagnosed with cancer and you sit in front of your doctor and say, how many patients like me have you seen in the last year? The doctor's going to make up a number. And the truth is, the doctor's not going to know. Well, a good doctor will say, I really don't know, because that's the truth. And so, I think we live in a reality where a tiny fraction of patients with cancer participate in clinical trials, depending on what you read, 3, 5, 8%, small number. And we don't learn much from all the other folks who are diagnosed and may be cured and maybe die of their disease. Whatever the case may be, we don't learn from those people. So, I think as an industry, we need to be laser focused on how do we learn from the rest of people. So when a patient says to their doctor, how many patients have you seen like me? What worked for them? What didn't work? How am I going to feel? That the doctor can actually answer those questions in a data-driven way, and that's absent today.
And certainly that's one of the hallmarks of our program. We're looking at diversity at scale. We want to make sure that all populations are represented, not just racial and ethnic minorities, but minorities of all kinds, socioeconomic, educational, rural, sexual and gender minorities, because in order to have the data that Andrew is talking about, you have to have the participants in the studies and in the research. And we all know that most of the databases right now consist mostly of Caucasian and male. And so it's, many of the medications that all of us are taking were not designed for racial and ethnic minorities and other communities. So that's what our program is hoping to do, is to learn more about, the lifestyle, environment, and biology of people from all walks of life so that everyone can have access to better treatment.
So data does two things. So if you're watching it, it may be, for example, multiple myeloma, which skews older male and African American. We have been able to generate a very significant database, and within our own database where we do genomic sequencing, immune profiling, it's longitudinal, it's clinical, it has everything in there, and anybody can use it. What we have found is we need to use data to teach all of the community of the 11 drugs we've had approved and all the progress we've made. How should they be using those drugs? Should they use 3 drugs instead of 2? Should they move to transplant or not? So we have to take all of that and teach everybody how to use it. But we can also go into our data set and actually study the African American community and understand that their myeloma looks different than somebody else's myeloma. And it may be that they don't have as high-risk myeloma. Once we know that, we then again have to teach everybody how to use that data to teach those patients. So it becomes super specific. Like if you're a high-risk patient, you really need to know your genomics, you eventually need to know your immune profile, and all the data that you get is more advantageous on your personal journey. But you also want to see the data in context to everybody else's data out there too.
But even those drugs that Kathy mentioned, most of them have not been tested on African Americans, even though multiple myeloma is more commonly found in African Americans. So, that's what we're trying to do, is to make sure that, people of all races and ethnicities participate in research so that they could potentially benefit from the cures.
Right, okay. So to bring it back to the patient perspective, I'm convinced at an intellectual level this is a great idea and that there could be benefits in the long term to all sorts of people. But what a doctor might be asking for from me right now is something to give some data that I don't immediately see a return for me personally on. How do you navigate what sounds like it might require some sort of spirit of caring about someone greater than just myself?
So I think in a situation like that, and I think we're all wrestling with this area, which is now you have the data, now the clinician has the data, and now we're in a situation where we're trying to give the data directly back to a patient. Our mantra is, if the patient has given us their sample and we've pulled together their data, we need to give them the report. Now what happens is, and there's a number of us working on this together across all cancers up at Harvard Business School, what are you returning directly to the patient? What does the patient see? What does the doctor see? How do you bring in, like we had to bring in an entire call center at the MMRF just to make sure we can answer those questions. We have to have genomic counselors. But I will tell you, from all the advice we've been getting, return of results always comes back to what is actionable versus what is not. And so you always have to be careful. There's a little bit of gray area in there in terms of what some people might think is actionable and what is not. But you have to do it as a pilot, and I think that's what I like about all of us as well, that we kind of work at this from a fatal disease standpoint, and then all of us is doing it from their perspective. And what I like about working up at Harvard is we bring these groups together so we can learn from all of us and they can learn from us. At the end of the day, I will tell you two things, though. It comes down to engaging the patient to sign up and be part of all of our programs and to trust us as research foundations or as all of us to engage with us, get the samples, give the data. But it's also about retention, because if you don't keep the patient longitudinally, you don't get the best of data to understand what happens in the disease.
Right. So that's exactly what I'm interested in. Why should I trust you? And I do. I mean, I totally do. I'm just playing devil's advocate here.
We're doctors.
Okay.
Wow.
It's a joke. It's a joke. So I would just make two comments. I don't think persuading patients to be altruistic is a problem. I don't think that's a problem. Cancer patients are unbelievably generous. And, Kathy's program with MMRF involves going to patients with myeloma and saying, would you like to contribute your data, clinical and genomic, to advance cures for this disease? And there's like an unbelievable groundswell. And I think we see something similar happening with all of us. To me, the challenge is, what is the sort of policy realm and the financial infrastructure in which we all live that enables these important activities to move forward? I don't think it's about getting patients engaged, because I think patients want to help other patients who may come after them.
And that's true, but as I mentioned, we're focusing on people before they're ever patients.
That's fair.
And so there's not that same determination and drive to get involved and engage. There are many communities across the nation that we have to convince why it's important for them to be involved in research, and with good reason. They have some concerns. I mean, there have been historical transgressions that have led people to be skeptical about research. So we have to make clear the value proposition. We talk about our participants as participant partners. We engage them in the governance of our program. We ask them what kind of information that they want returned back to them. That's pretty unusual for a research program where we work with actual participants and community-based organizations who really lend us their voice and their trust so that we can connect to participants and help them understand that if you are not a part of the research, you may be left out of the cures. And that's what the All of Us research program is all about, bringing us all together so that we can be benefiting from all the amazing advances that have been spoken about earlier today.
Right.
But you have to be transparent.
Can I just before we go to that, we're going to go to audience questions in just 1 second. So if you want to put in anything into the system, we'll get to that in just one moment. Yeah. But
no, I was just going to say, I mean, in today's world where, you just read the article from Google and the issues that happen today, and I mean, we're always hearing about issues around privacy and things like that. And I think the real answer is that if patients understand before they sign that consent what they're signing, and if they understand what you plan on doing with that data, which I find most people that are trying to pull data together are trying to do it for the right reasons. If you tell them in advance, this is how we plan to use your data, this is how you will benefit and why you will benefit, and you have 100% transparency, it's so much better than if later on a consumer or patient hears, somebody got my data and I didn't know it was going there. That transparency and trust is going to affect all of us. I think as patient groups, and because I am a patient myself and we live and breathe in the patient world, in myeloma, I think the sign-up happens quickly, but you also feel that burden on your shoulders every day that wherever that data is going, it better be safe.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question here from the audience. What does the clinic of the future look like to operationally utilize this data for MDs and patients in real time?
That's a visionary question, and it's exciting to really think about where this goes. And frankly, there are some important obstacles we need to overcome in order to get to this point, like interoperability, like capturing data in sort of analysis-ready format rather than the way it is today, buried deep in doctors' notes. It's hard enough for people to read doctors' notes, let alone computers. That said, imagine a world where you're sitting in front of your physician and you ask that question that I started with. How many patients like me have you treated in the last year? And the doctor can make a couple of clicks. And I think this is going to be real, in 5 to 10 years at the most. A couple of clicks and you say, I've treated 175 people like you, and here are the symptoms that they experienced. Here are the treatment choices that we offered. This one works better than this one, and here's how I know. And I think, and then what's more, you can say to the patient, why don't you sign consent right now so that your experience can be included in this database, and the next patient who comes, I'll be able to include your experience.
But don't you think in some ways I feel like it's already happening, because we take some of the information we put together on what we think the patient journey looks like, and then you were there, we started working with Intermountain, right? So they're a great group, they're somewhat of a closed system, but now they're watching that data and they're using that data to say, how should we treat our patients in Intermountain that have myeloma? But then they're also using it as a learning tool, and so it becomes an interactive cycle. I think the hardest part about data is deciding who wants to play together and who wants to answer that really relevant question in your disease. And the question changes because, it may be in, myeloma, we're saying, well, it hasn't been cured. We've had a lot of new drugs approved. We know immunotherapy will work. So my plea to BMS, which now bought Celgene, would be, please, let us know what's going on in immune. Let's use standards and understand which exact patients benefit from that data and keep bringing it back. I like to see who raises their hand to say, we've got a question, we need to answer it together. I'm in the community, the academic center, the pharma company, the patient group, and how do we bring that ecosystem together?
Okay, and I really would love to get to this one. For a final question, what are the top 2 to 3 barriers to collecting sufficient data from non-white male people, and what needs to change?
And the first answer is trust. The second answer is trust. And the third answer is trust. There is a huge distrust in the medical system, and again, for good reason. Think about Tuskegee, think about Henrietta Lacks, think about the Guatemala syphilis experience. There are so many reasons why people don't trust their data. And then in the world that we live in now, where everyone is, trying to get data and information about others, people are afraid that their data will be compromised. But I can assure you that our program, the All of Us Research Program, is doing everything to try to protect participants' data that they provide. And as Kathy mentioned, it's our number one priority. Mm-hmm. But again, in this world, we cannot, guarantee that it won't be compromised, but we can certainly tell you that we're doing everything we possibly can. And then building trust, we're working with community-based organizations. We're doing what we say we're going to do. we're leveraging all of the things that have been put in place, like institution review boards and other safe havens that have been put in place to make sure that we no longer misuse a person's information. And we're working directly with the participants in our program, asking them what they want, how would they like to see their information returned. So we're building this wonderful ecosystem of people who are invested in the program, and that's how we're building the bi-directional engagement that we need.
Thank you all so much for your time. This has been really informative.